Joining us now, this was one of my favorite guests to have on because he's so knowledgeable. Ambassador Patrick Theros. He is the former U.S. ambassador to Qatar in the Obama administration. He's also a senior advisor to the Gulf International Forum. And Ambassador Theros is a career Foreign Service diplomat. And I don't want to embarrass you, Mr. Ambassador, but a couple of times, one of my most favorite things to do in Washington is when I get to just sit down with him for a beer and we're off the record and just tell stories about some of the things that he's experienced and throughout his career, and gives me the ins and outs of Washington. And he's traveled the globe, obviously, in various positions all over. And it is really a fascinating experience. And we're blessed to have him with us on our show. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for being with us.
John, thank you very much. I really enjoy our conversations, talking, in whether it's personally or on the show, and I really do enjoy this. Let me just add a caveat, however. You will find that most of my colleagues who had the same experiences that I did can be just as entertaining as I am. So I think we're... I'll put in a plug for the American Foreign Service. I think it's one of the best diplomatic services in the world, and it is underused. But other than that, John, it's a great pleasure to be here.
When you say it's underused, Mr. Ambassador, elaborate on that.
Okay, talking about Afghanistan. I heard your very, very correct description of what's happened in the last few hours, last week. We looked at Afghanistan primarily as a military problem from the very beginning. Afghanistan is a military problem, but that's not where the basis of the problem rests. It is essentially a political governance and diplomatic problem that needs to be solved by people who don't look at this as how many troops we have on the ground and how many of their side did we kill and how many of our side got killed. This is a question of This is an Afghan civil war in which we are fighting. One of the reasons we are engaged in the fighting is because, frankly, we don't like other people. We really don't think anybody else can fight as well as we can, and we sort of elbow our way up to the front lines. And we've got this thing like we want to do the fighting. No, we don't want to do the fighting. This is an Afghan civil war between two or multiple sides in Afghanistan, actually. And what we need to do is get ourselves out of the firing line. We shouldn't leave, not now, but we shouldn't be part of the combat. What we need to do is make the Afghan armed forces and the Afghan government, more importantly than the armed forces, functional. If we're going to throw our weight around, I don't want to throw our weight around with artillery and helicopter gunships. I want to throw our weight around with diplomats in Afghanistan, in Kabul, telling the in effect, saying to the Afghan government, hey, guys, this is what you're doing wrong. And everybody knows what they're doing wrong. And if you got to fire a few of your close buddies and your cousin and your wife's brother, so be it. But otherwise, we'll leave. But the threat to leave should be a threat with a threat to the Afghan government that says you've got to get your act together, and here are the 46 list of things you have to do. Mm-hmm. Because there's no reason. I mean, these are Afghans fighting Afghans. The Taliban are no better soldiers and no worse soldiers than the Afghan army. But what you have is an Afghan army that is riddled with corruption, with political officers who are there. They're guys. Battalion commanders get their troops' salaries, and then they keep half the salaries for themselves. Mm-hmm. Those kind of guys have to go. Regional governors are appointed by the central government. They're corrupt. They cut deals with the Taliban. They cut deals with a lot of criminal elements who are posing as insurgents and opposition and militia. Mm-hmm. So this is a work for diplomats. This is what, we did this in 1948 in Greece. In 1948, after the Brits came to us and said that they couldn't support the government side anymore against the communists, Harry Truman passes the Greece-Turkey Aid Act, huge, I think at the time $400 million, like $5 billion now. Mm-hmm. And we walk in, and we had brilliant general in command and a brilliant ambassador, and they essentially said to the Greek army, to the Greek government, which had the same problem as in 1948 that the Afghan government does now, and say, you got to get your act together.
Mm-hmm.
They got the Greek government to fire, to understand what it had to do, stop interfering politically,
right.
Cut out corruption. And you know what? 18 months after we got there, the communists had surrendered. They'd been completely defeated, and exactly one American was killed in that whole operation.
So that was done the right way, right?
That was done the right way, and then we never learned that lesson because there are too many American politicians, occasionally even soldiers who think, we've got to do the fighting. No, we don't have to do the fighting.
Right.
We got to do the training. We got to do the equipping. We've got to, we can provide intelligence. We can do all sorts of things, but we don't have to do the fighting. And you know what? That way, you also rob the guerrillas, in this case the Taliban, you rob them of a propaganda point, which is it's the Americans occupying our country.
Right.
If you don't see any Americans shooting, then you can't make that point.
So where do we go from here? And let's take a step back a minute. We're with Ambassador Patrick Theros, former ambassador to Qatar and senior advisor now to the Gulf International Forum, career Foreign Service diplomat in the United States. So the Trump got a lot of criticism for this potential meeting with the Taliban at Camp David. Obviously, he's trying to craft a peace treaty of some kind. It all blew up, and yesterday he comes on in his press conference with the press pool and says talks with them are completely dead. He said the word dead 3 times. He said they're dead, dead, dead. Where do you go from here?
Well, talking to the Taliban talking to your enemy is never a bad idea. Where I think he got it wrong is at first you got to talk to the Afghan government. Mm-hmm. And you got to talk like a Dutch uncle to the Afghan government. Mm-hmm. We are supporting you. Like I said, we are supporting you. We've got troops in the country. We've got all sorts of things. And you guys are the ones mucking up. You guys are the guys losing the Civil War. We've got to go back and figure out why. So the first meeting at Camp David should have been with or anywhere else, should have been with the Afghan government at a really come-to-Jesus type meeting. Mm-hmm. This is all the mistakes you are making, and you've got to fix it if you want us to stay there. And if you don't want to fix it, then we are going to cut a deal with the Taliban and pull out. Now, the downside of the Taliban in this case, I don't think these guys are crazy. These guys are trying to fix the fact that they don't control all the insurgent forces in Afghanistan. Oh. There are different factions within the Taliban. I'm not that much privy to the intelligence anymore, but if there's one faction that really doesn't like the way the talks with the Americans are going, they'll go do something like killing an American soldier to blow up the talks. So I don't think the Taliban that we are negotiating with can actually deliver all the different factions.
So the analogy would be, I don't know, it was you or someone told me a month ago when I couldn't believe that the Iranians would shoot a hole in a tanker. It didn't make any sense to me, and I kind of thought maybe UAE did it. And you or someone else said to me, the IRA, the Iranian Revolutionary Army, and their commanders, they're not always responsible to central government. So they might do what they think they need to do to change the direction of something. If they don't like what's going on, they'll act on their own. You're kind of saying the same thing here with the Taliban insurgents, that all the factions aren't tied together. There's no real central command. And if this particular faction doesn't like the way it's going, or they weren't part of the talks, they screw it up by launching an attack.
Right, exactly. So now the president has called off the peace talks with the Taliban, and the Taliban leadership is doing the only thing they really can do to keep all their factions more or less the same script, which is play tough. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to attack all the American troops trying to leave.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I think this is not so much crazy as it reveals the internal problems the Taliban have in keeping their forces together, which again reinforces the argument that It isn't that we have to weaken the Taliban. We have to make the Afghan government, help the Afghan government make itself stronger.
And you're not going to do that if you have a complete troop drawdown, right?
That's correct.
Right. So a lot of us are now coming to the realization that, it's great to say get the troops out, but the reality is, it's almost every one I've had on is that's been there, is, like yourself, has told me the same thing, that our troops need to be there in a different capacity, but a complete drawdown is going to create a chaotic situation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because right now the Afghan government is probably worse at governing than the Taliban would be.
Okay, let's move on. We're with Ambassador Patrick Theros, former Qatar ambassador, U.S., senior advisor to the Gulf International Forum. Ambassador John Bolton fired. What did you make of that?
I don't know how any president could have stood having John Bolton as a national security advisor for more than a week. Honestly, truth and just for complete transparency, I worked with him for a little bit in a previous administration, and I'll tell you, it was really hard to get along with him.
Yeah.
And he's very forceful. He's got his ideas, and he is very persistent, aggressive, like a bulldog, in pushing those ideas. And I can distill his ideas into two sentences. One, he believes that might makes right, and two, he believes the sword is mightier than the pen. He has never seen a situation in which the military solution is not the only solution.
So should run counter to finding diplomatic solutions. I was never a fan. I was very much opposed to him going in. He's a neocon warmonger of a past time, and I couldn't believe the president picked him. I get that Trump likes to get different opinions and advice, but I knew this guy would be a disaster, and he certainly was of no value there. He's got a very different view than President Trump has. We elected Trump, those that voted for him, like me, to get a different kind of a foreign policy. Certainly not the old Mitt Romney, John McCain, neocon, flex your muscle and go around and changing regime foreign policies that has failed us for so long. So I popped the champagne, to be honest, when the guy went.
I think John Bolton is a good example of what we were talking about with the Taliban, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. This is somebody inside the administration doesn't like the way policy is going, and periodically he would make statements designed to mess up what the policy was.
Like the statement he made when he said we need the Libyan solution for North Korea, right? He didn't like the way those talks were going, so he bombshelled that out, knowing that it would screw everything up.
Yeah, exactly.
This guy's a disaster.
There is a point. I was in the Foreign Service for 36 years. One of the great things and what makes the American Foreign Service so good is that as long as you keep it in-house, no one's ever going to tell you not to express an opinion. No one's ever going to argue with you that if the boss, it doesn't matter what you think, you've got to support what the boss says. You have an obligation to tell the boss the truth. However, you also have an obligation when the boss finally makes up his mind, rightly or wrongly, you play it his way. You play it as best you can. You can do some things in nuance, but in the end, you either quit or you do what the decision was.
Right.
And John Bolton was not that kind of player.
Out, good riddance. Don't let the door hit you in the keister on the way out. Is my view
absolutely.
Of that. Okay, let's change. Let's change up here. I've only got about 5 minutes. Big article in Politico magazine the other day accusing the Israeli government of putting spying devices around the White House. Of course, the Israeli government, Mr. Ambassador, denying that, but it's kind of cloak and dagger stuff. Like they walked around in different parts and put listening devices. They're denying it. You've been in the Foreign Service for 40 years. What do you think?
There are, without going into really sensitive grounds, there are lots. We have a very complex intelligence relationship with many countries around the world. We spy on some, we cooperate with some, we cut deals with some, and there are a few very privileged countries in which we avoid trying to poke into their business. There have been some cases where this hasn't held. The Pollard case is a good example.
Right.
Pollard spied for the Israeli intelligence service. Mm-hmm. This should have been a lesson. Again, I don't know anything about what is going on, but I would say it is entirely possible mm-hmm. that this happened, and it wouldn't be out of character.
Based on the Pollard case, which is the only one that came to light, right? We don't know how many that didn't come to light. That's the only thing about them. You see one of these, and you always say, I mean, it's like when the USSR would have hired spies, and there's been movies made about them. You catch one or two, but that there's 10 more where they came from because that's their policy. That's how they're getting intel, and et cetera.
Yeah. I'll give you an example of how, again, within services, you've got a rule that says you can't have a spy there, and then some guy further down the line develops one who is so good that he goes to his bosses, and his bosses say, you know what, maybe we'll let this one slide, even though we weren't supposed to do it.
Right. Exactly. All right, let's stay on Israel a second. We touched on something a week ago. I just want you to give me an update on, because I've been really looking into this. The shadow Israeli government in Jerusalem. There are forces there, people that are, let's call them private public. What do we have in the United States? PPOs or something? Was you have a PPPs, right?
Partnerships.
Private.
Sorry.
So there's PPPs in Israel. There's private-public partnerships, and they're trying to confiscate the land of the Christian churches in Jerusalem, and the Israeli government is doing nothing to stop it. And that land, which is historic, has been there for so many years. Is that's how the churches generate the income in order to survive and be there and offer the place of Christianity for Christians in Israel, right. And they're trying to get rid of those. What is going on with this?
Just that. There are people who, for a variety of it's either greed because the land's worth so much, or it's ideology that they want to get rid of all the minorities of the Christians in Jerusalem. That they've fixed on this particular target. There is no easier way, no more. I mean, this way you're not persecuting anybody; you're just starving them to death. You permit churches to function independently and freely, and there's no interference with religion, et cetera, et cetera. But then you take away their source of income. So everything really hinges now on how the elections are going to come out. Frankly, we're still a very short time away. I've never been a terribly big fan of Netanyahu, but he's not stupid. He's a man who recognizes that these forces, sort of this dark force you talked about, these forces are apt to push Israel into a confrontation with organized Christianity worldwide, and they don't much care. Mm-hmm. But he cares. He realized that this would be a disaster for the Israeli state, but at the same time, he needs these guys for votes. But until now, he's been fairly courageous about it. It worries me, however, that the chances that he's either going to have to make a lot of concessions to these people to win, or he's going to lose the elections and these people are going to come to power. So, but right now, the actual facts on the ground are sort of static. Everybody's sitting around holding their breath, waiting for the election, see what's going to happen.
Well, are you confident that Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to step in and stop this land confiscation, which is whether, like you said, the objective is greed or displacement of a minority, but the land confiscation is designed to eject minority Christians from Jerusalem? Mr. Ambassador, how confident are you that the Prime Minister is going to stop this?
I personally believe that if he is Prime Minister, when push comes to shove, unless he is, right now I would be very confident that he would stop it. What I don't know, and no one knows outside the inner circles there, is what sort of deal he's going to cut for political support. Because when it's over, he's going to have his political party may or may not be the strongest one there. If it is, he's going to be called upon to form a government. In order to form the government, he's going to have to cut deals with a whole bunch of parties. And if he cuts deals with parties to his right, this is apt to be on the table. And that's what worries me.
All right. Well, the next international trip that I make, I'm going to go to Jerusalem because I can't find any media coverage on this except me. I'm like I'm doing it myself.
Yeah.
There's no
Actually,
coverage.
There's more media coverage on it in the Israeli press than there is anything else. It's interesting.
Well, we need to go there and flush it out because this
Absolutely.
is as a if you really understand the history of Christianity in Jerusalem, I mean these are sacred, and the churches need the land in order to survive and support themselves and offer the houses of worship to Christians in Israel.
I'll tell you, it is a unique city. I hope you get to go there pretty soon. I think you will. But it really is a unique city. When you go there, there's a feeling about it that I've not felt in any other city I've ever visited in the world.
All right, Mr. Ambassador, I'm out of time. I got to roll, but I got to ask you one final question. How's your wife? She hurt her wrist. How's she doing?
She will survive. Unfortunately, she's right-handed and she broke her right wrist. And you can imagine what that means for a very dynamic and active woman.
I know she is very, and you tell her that I said hi and I give her my best. Mr. Ambassador, I know you have to take off, and so do I. John Fredericks Radio Network, thank you for being with us as always. Ambassador Patrick Theros, former Ambassador Qatar, Senior Advisor, Gulf International Forum. Have a great weekend.